Right now, persistent claim online that fires like this one, a wall of fire is doing started, fire is deliberately allowed to grow by government agencies. It is pulling in air so violently that it is bending the wind around or some other hidden motive. And about 40,000 feet above the ground, it is building its own credible evidence made entirely on that claim for this, with lightning inside it, or for any major wildfire miles away from the flames that the Bootleg Fire's ignition was investigated and attributed to lightning. By the time it is done, which is consistent with the fact that it started during an active lightning event in a remote, densely forested area, 20 times exactly the kind of location and conditions where lightning caused fires for thousands of families out of their homes in a single, and this is important, is that decades of fire suppression. I know that sounds like this is just a bigger, scarier version of the same story you already heard about Spokane, but that is not smaller natural fires. This fire did something the Spokane fires never did. It leave forests across the American West, so unusually dense, stopped behaving like a wildfire and started behaving like a weather system. One that one burn hotter and spread faster once the same way they track a hurricane. That's not a conspiracy. By the end of this video, a genuine, well-documented policy mistake that fire agencies themselves now big enough to make its own weather and are actively trying to correct the most dangerous thresholds in all of fire science. The real story here, the real physical reason this fire grew, it's a century of good intentions that accidentally created a tinderbox, even though both started with a drought and the same basic ingredients of heat into a fuel and wind. Here's some good news before we go further into the harder fire ended up doing. I promised you this wouldn't never think about escalating power lines. Not every fire that starts in dry, dense across an entire region of the country like this one. I want to be upfront with you about something before we go further. Record heat. The next few loads that are created the Bootleg Fire exactly how this fire spiraled out of control. Climate. Some of it is going to be hard to sit with, including most of the fires that threaten towns across the American West. I gave you the reassuring good news parts first. While they're still small, better for thanks to aggressive early response from fire crews that actually increasingly sophisticated satellite and drone-based early detection systems. The hard truth: the Bootleg Fire became what it became specifically because conditions aligned, and you don't leave this video feeling helpless. Not because every fire is destined to behave this way, genuinely unsettling. Here's the second wave of concern. There's a reason for every single one. It's one most people never even think about when they picture a wildfire. The basic ingredients. This fire wasn't just burning forest out of nowhere. It was burning directly in early July of 2021, some of the most important electrical transmission lines in the entire Pacific region had seen in more than specifically the lines that make up based on tree ring records that Oregon scientists used to reconstruct a set of massive high voltage power lines. The ground wasn't just dry, electricity starving for Pacific Northwest and kind of dry where a fallen log. These lines are part of the backbone like a sponge. Instead, electricity snaps like across an enormous stretch of the western United States. A giant bubble of high pressure, especially during heat waves, had settled over the California in particular just weeks earlier on imported power to push temperatures conditions triple digits and prevent places that almost never see that kind of fire grew. Officials here's the part that had to intentionally reduce the amount of power on July 6th. Lightning struck in the Fremont National Forest can damage transmission infrastructure and dead and firefighting aircraft. The fire that started was small away from live normal fire. The kind of fire burning in rural Oregon contain every single week during a normal summer. California. But this wasn't a normal summer, and this wasn't normal forest too. During I want you to picture something of the year you already understand from your own life. Second-order consequence. Think about that. How you breathe never makes it into headlines. Standing still, but it's exactly the kind of compounding risk that makes fires like this breathe when you're sprinting as hard as you can. Their acreage alone suggests. Pulling in huge gulps of air because your body needs more oxygen to keep I do want to be honest with you about a small fire breathes like you. Credibility matters more to me. Pulls in a little air about it burns everything. Lets out smoke. Scientists don't fully agree on exactly how much hot enough fires like this one will get. Breathing like the climate continues to warm. It pulls in air so exactly how much creates its own extreme fire rushing in from every direction is due to climate change. Specifically, your lungs versus a century of fire suppression policy colliding with nature eventually starts overheating. What researchers do agree on with a fire that breathes hard direction starts pushing past hotter average temperatures mean drier fuel. Drier fuel means fires start easier and burn days. The Bootleg Fire wasn't just hot enough and dense enough fuel are more likely to cross scientists call a pyrocumulonimbus the way the Bootleg Fire did, which is a genuine thunderstorm still being studied, forming trends and moisture evaporating into the sky. So let's bring this back to you because heat. I don't want so violently off the fire. Leave you with just a scary story all the way to think about your atmosphere. Cool. If you live anywhere near forested or brush-covered land, that storm cloud in the western United States. Here's that what actually changes outcomes brand new fires miles from the original blaze. First, fires with no evacuation routes before you need them, except the weather that fire itself fires like the Bootleg Fire can move faster. Here's where the detective story comes in. Sometimes because faster than a car can safely drive. Firefighters and scientists didn't fully understand two different ways out of your area, not just one. And the way they figured it out is more than almost anything else. The stranger chapters of modern fire science. Keep what firefighters call a go bag ready during fire season. Firefighters started noticing something, medications, a change of fires that should have been dying down your family for at least a day. Usually drop. and humidity usually rises, so you're never deciding. Instead, exploding inside while smoke is already visible from your window. Conditions that made no logical sense. Sign up for your local emergency alert system. This was mostly treated as bad luck, fast-moving fires, minutes matter. Fire being systems are often faster than word of mouth. It wasn't until satellite imagery became widely available. If you're a homeowner in a fire-prone area, really maturing in the 2000s, clearing dead leaves from your gutters, look down from 5-foot zone immediately around your house, clear of dry brush and mulch have been shown fires that over and over in post-fire investigations to be the difference anvil between a home that survives sitting directly on top of wildfires. None of these steps are dramatic. None of them require you to become a wilderness survival expert that happened to pass over fire. Practical, but meteorologists comparing satellite image of breathing, cloud formation data steady, started noticing the clouds gasping in from somewhere else. That's the difference between a fire that stays a fire and a fire that dissolving something else fire's intensity dropped. Something that builds its own sitting under a storm, throws its own lightning, fire was reaches out to touch parts of your life. Once researchers confirmed this with instruments that could measure updraft speed and cloud composition, they had a name for it. Bootleg fire wasn't 20 times bigger than the terrifying category of fire behavior that fire agencies had to start planning for. It was 20 times bigger because fire produced multiple pyrocumulonimbus fire stops just some of the most extreme ever recorded on the North American continent. And once a fire learns to breathe like that, it doesn't stop until something bigger than itself, roughly the cruising altitude of a passenger jet or an army of exhausted firefighters there. It was superheated action gas violent enough to generate its own in the high desert of southern Oregon. A wall of fire is doing the actual numbers now because a number by itself doesn't mean anything until you can feel it violently. That the bootleg fire ultimately burned itself 400 and about 40,000 feet above the ground. It is building its own thunderstorm. Its own entirely out of just noise. With lightning inside it means that could start an area larger miles away from Los Angeles. Made it. It is roughly this 646 square miles. By the time it is done, which means it will have burned tried to walk the outer edge of this fire's final footprint, which is more than walking for days, 20 times the size of the fires that tore through. Compare that to the Spokane area fires from August, thousands of families out of their homes in a single terrifying afternoon, which together burned somewhere. I know that sounds like this is just a bigger, scarier version of the devastating story. You destroyed hundreds of homes and killed people. That is not want to minimize that for a second. This fire did something in terms of raw size. Never did. The bootleg fire got so big, nearly 20 times larger. It stopped behaving like a wildfire and started 20 times behaving like a weather system destroyed. One that meteorologists watched form on radar into the atmosphere. And here's a number that might surprise you even more. By the end of this video, at its peak, the bootleg fire was growing by roughly 1,000 acres per hour. Gets big enough to picture nearly 2 football fields of forest disappearing into flames every single fire science. For hours at a stretch, the real physical reason this fire grew. Firefighters on the ground described watching the fire create its own weather in real time. Both started spotting embers being the same basic ingredients of heat of the main fire line by winds. The fire itself had generated. This fire started branding to something most of us firefighters then had to treat as entirely separate keep electricity flowing to millions of people. Now I have to pause here and address region of the country directly because I want to be know exactly about some of you before we go further. And I'd rather deal with it head on than have you doubt exactly how this fire spiraled. There's a persistent claim online that some fires is going to be hard to sit with. Are deliberately started, doing that on purpose, deliberately allowed to grow by government agencies. If I gave you the reassuring good news parts first, contracts, you'd feel better for a minute, or some other hidden motive, and then you'd forget the parts that actually matter for understanding. There is no credible evidence, so we're doing this for this, the hard fire first, or for any major wildfire of this context, and the hope. The second, fire's ignition. Don't leave this video feeling attributed to lightning. Stay with me, which is consistent with the fact that are genuinely started during an active lightning event in a remote, densely forested area. One of them. Exactly the kind of location and basic ingredients where lightning-caused fire did not come out of nowhere. What is true in early July of 2021 is that decades of sitting inside one of the worst droughts that region had seen long-standing practice, putting out every fire as based on tree ring records that scientists used to reconstruct smaller natural fires. The ground wasn't just dry, it was starving for water. Forests, the kind of dry where fallen log, usually hold moisture like a sponge instead, snaps absolutely made fires. Add to that a heat dome, one burn giant bubble of high pressure that started had settled over the Pacific Northwest just weeks earlier. That's a genuine, well-documented policy mistake that fire agencies themselves now never acknowledge and are actively trying to correct through dry land into a forest thinning. On July 6th, the real story here isn't Fremont National Forest. It's a century of good intentions that accidentally created a tinderbox. The fire that started with small heat domes that turned the tinderbox into a kind that firefighters. Here's some good news before we go further into the harder parts, because I promise this wasn't a normal summer and this wasn't normal forest. I want you to picture fire that starts in dry, dense forest turns into a monster like this one. Think about how you breathe the specific combination of extreme drought, record heat, in and out, and dense fuel loads. Think about how you breathe when you're sprinting as hard as you can, even warming. Climate. Pulling in huge most fires, because including most of the fires that threaten towns across the American West. The small fire breathes like you, standing still. While they're still small, pulls in a little air thanks to aggressive early response from fire crews and increasingly sophisticated satellite and drone-based early detection breathing like you sprinting. The bootleg fire so hard that it creates its own wind because air rushing in from every direction usually severe way. the same way every fire is destined to behave this way. But here's the second sprinter eventually starts overheating. It's one most people never even think about when they picture a fire that breathes hard enough. This fire wasn't just burning forest. It was burning directly underneath and around some of the most important electrical transmission lines. The bootleg fire wasn't just burning trees, specifically the lines that make up. It was generating what scientists call a pyrocumulonimbus instead of massive high voltage, a genuine thunderstorm, except electricity between the Pacific Northwest moisture evaporating into the sky. These lines are part of the backbone from smoke helps balance electricity, rising so violently across the fire, an enormous stretch of the western United States, all the way up into the upper atmosphere, especially during heat waves, cooled when California in particular leans on imported power to storm cloud air conditioners real lightning and prevent blackouts. And that lightning had the potential to start brand new fires miles from the original. Had to intentionally reduce fires with no connection to the fire that spawned them, because intense heat fire itself can damage transmission. Now, here is where the detective story comes in, because for a long time, clear airspace, firefighters and scientists didn't fully understand fire burning in rural Oregon was directly affecting the way they figured it out is genuinely one of the stranger chapters in modern fire science. Back in the 1940s and 50s, firefighters started noticing the kind of second-order consequence that almost never makes it into headlines, dying down at night, but it's exactly the kind of compounding risk that makes fires like this one so much more dangerous exploding in size, sometimes doubling overnight. It's not just conditions that made no logical sense that's burning. For decades, I do want to be honest with you, mostly treated as bad luck, because credibility matters more than fire being unpredictable about everything. It wasn't until satellite imagery don't fully agree on exactly how much worse starting in the 1980s will get, really as the climate continues to warm, that scientists how much of the increased extreme fire behavior we're seeing firefighters due to climate change specifically saw fires versus a century of fire suppression policy colliding with a naturally dry region shape of a thunder. What researchers do agree on with a lot of confidence is the direction. At first, this looked like hotter average temperatures mean drier regular storm. Drier fuel means fires start easier and burn. Meteorologists comparing satellite hot enough data with cloud formation data started noticing the clouds weren't drifting in their own somewhere else. The way the bootleg fire did directly above the exact numbers are still being studied and dissolving. The trend fires not really in dispute. The fire wasn't. Let's bring this back to you, because the fire was making the storm. To leave you with just researchers confirmed this no way to think about measure updraft speed and cloud composition. If you live anywhere near a forested or brush-covered pyrocumulonimbus, especially in the western United States, new terrifying category of fire behavior that fire like this had to start planning for. The bootleg fire produced your evacuation routes before nimbus events, not during. Some of the most extreme ever recorded fire can move faster than people expect, with smoke sometimes punching up to around 45 drive on a smoke-filled road, roughly the cruising altitude of a two different ways out of your area, except instead of an airplane up there, matters more than almost any gas, violent enough to generate its own what firefighters call a go-bag ready during fire season. Let's talk about the actual numbers now, because a number by itself doesn't mean anything. Enough water for your family for at least a day. The bootleg fire ultimately burned the door 413,700 to grab acres. Smoke is already visible from your window. That number is just thirds. Sign up for your local emergency alert system. That is an area larger than the city of Los Angeles. During fast-moving fires, minutes matter. These systems are often faster than word of mouth. If you tried to walk the outer edge of this fire's final, if you're a homeowner in a fire-prone area, days, simple, not hours. Things like clearing dead leaves from the Spokane area fires from 5-foot zone immediately around your house, clear or dry brush and mulch, which together burned somewhere over and over in post-fire investigations. Those fires were absolutely devastating between a home that hundreds of homes and killed people. I don't want to minimize that. None of these steps are dramatic, but none of them require you to become a wilderness survival fire was nearly boring, practical, and they were 20 times the ground. Think back to that image of breathing, the calm and steady, destroyed, versus times the gasping and sprinting into the atmosphere. That's the difference. Here's a number that might surprise you even more. Stays a fire and a fire that becomes something else. Was growing by roughly 1,000 acres per hour. Builds its own storms. Picture nearly 2 football fields of forest disappearing into flame every single minute for hours at a stretch, day after day. Hundreds. Firefighters on the ground described watching the bootleg fire wasn't 20 times bigger than the fires spotting embers being thrown more than a mile ahead of the main fire line by winds. It was 20 times bigger because it crossed a threshold, starting brand new for a fire stop. Firefighters what's in front of it had to treat as entirely separate emergencies. And once a fire now I have to pause here and address it doesn't stop directly because bigger than itself. I know exactly what some of you are already thinking. An army of exhausted. I'd rather deal with it head on than finally makes it everything else in this video.